Wyoming Territory, January 1872. The wind had teeth that morning sharp, bitter things biting straight through the wool of Barret Flynn's coat as he guided his wagon east down the snow-choked road toward Rawlins. The sun was barely up, its pale light barely cutting the gray. His horses, two sturdy mustangs, snorted clouds of steam into the freezing air, hooves crunching over hardened snow. Barret was not a man to stop for much. But when he saw the Tarp mud caked and half buried in the snowbank just off the road, he pulled on the reins. He jumped down from the wagon, boots sinking deep. Something about the way the Tarp looked caught him too carefully tucked, too still. He crouched, tugged back the corner, and stilled a woman. She was curled up, her lips blue, hands clenched into fists as if she had fought the cold with everything she had. Her dress was torn at the hem, soaked through. Her hair was dark with ice sticking to her cheeks and forehead. She looked barely alive. "Lord above," Barret muttered, peeling the tarp back farther. "Come on now, do not give up." He pressed his fingers to her throat, a pulse weak but there. He scooped her up, cradling her frozen body close. She was light, too light, bones sharp beneath layers of wet fabric. He got her into the back of the wagon, pushed hay around her, and pulled every blanket he had over her body. She did not stir. Barret climbed back to the seat, slapped the reins. "Go, go," the wagon lurched forward down the frozen trail. By the time they reached his ranch, her skin had begun to warm. Barret carried her inside his cabin, a sturdy two-room place with thick cedar walls and a fire that he stoked to life the second he had her settled on his bed. He stripped the wet clothes from her with careful hands, laid her beneath dry wool. She was young, maybe 20, and her face was bruised, right cheekbone, split lip. Someone had hit her hard. He sat by the bed as night fell. He never lit the lamps. The fire was enough. She woke just before midnight, her eyes fluttered, then opened a pale green color that caught the firelight. She blinked at the ceiling, then jerked where she lay. "Easy," Barret said, leaning forward. She pushed herself up fast, wild-eyed, the blanket falling to her chest. Barret turned his face away and grabbed the spare quilt from the chair, offering it to her. "You were beside the road," he said. "Wrapped in a tarp, I brought you here. You were near frozen." She stared at him. Her lips parted, but no sound came out at first. Then, after a long breath, she whispered, "Where am I?" "My ranch, about 5 miles west of Rawlins." She clutched the quilt tighter. "Who are you?" "Barret Flynn." He waited. She stared into the fire. Her voice was hoarse when she said, "My name's Faye Rourke." Barret nodded once. "You hungry?" She looked at him like she had not heard that word in a long time. He made her soup, boiled potatoes and wild onion, poured heavy with broth. She ate slowly, fingers trembling. She said nothing for a long while. When she finally spoke, it was quiet. "I walked for 2 days." Barret's hand froze on his mug. He looked up. "They left me," she said. "The wagon broke down. I was cold, and he said I slowed them down. So he rolled me up and left me, said if I was strong enough, I would follow." Barret's jaw clenched. "Who?" Faye blinked slowly. "My husband." Barret sat back. "You married?" Her voice cracked. "Not anymore." Barret said nothing at first. Then, "You were just going to walk to Rawlins in that storm?" Faye nodded, eyes distant. "I tried, but my legs gave out. I could not feel my hands anymore. I think I passed out by the road." Her voice broke on the last word. Barret looked into the fire, chest tight. "You are safe now." Faye stared down at her lap. "Why did you stop?" Barret shook his head. "Could not leave someone like that, not out there." She looked at him for a long time. Then, soft as snow, "Thank you." He gave a small nod, then stood. "You should rest." The next morning, she was stronger. She sat up on her own, helped fold the blankets, even asked if she could sweep the floor. "Not until you can walk across it without falling," Barret said. Faye gave him a look, but her lips curved slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it pulled at something in him. She stayed. 2 days turned into 5. Barret found her kneeling by the stove one evening, sleeves rolled up, cheeks flushed with heat as she stirred stew. "You do not have to be doing that," he said. Faye glanced up. "I want to. I feel better when I can do something." Barret leaned against the doorframe. "You look better." She turned back to the pot, but he saw her cheek color. That night, while they sat by the fire, Barret asked, "Where will you go?" Faye stared into the flames. "I do not know. I have no family left, no money, no papers." Barrett's hand tightened on his mug. "You could stay," he said. She looked at him, eyes wide. He cleared his throat, gaze fixed on the fire. "I mean, until you figure things out." Faye looked down. "I would like that." Winter held on through March, but Barret did not mind it so much, not with Faye in the house. She laughed more now, her bruises faded. Every night they sat by the fire, and every night they talked longer. He would not have called himself lonely before, but now, when she smiled at him from across the table, he could not imagine the cabin without her in it. One morning, he found her out by the barn, carrying a bucket of feed. "You should not be lifting that," he called. Faye rolled her eyes. "I am not glass, Mr. Flynn." Barret stepped forward, took the bucket from her. "Still, let me." She let him, and they walked side by side through the snow. At the barn, she turned to him. "You know," she said, brushing hair from her face, "I think this is the first place I have ever felt safe." Barret looked at her, heart thudding. "You are safe here, always." She stared at him for a long second, then she reached out and touched his hand. That was the first time, not a kiss. Just her fingers, warm and steady, curling around his. And Barret knew he was already halfway in love with her. The thaw came slow that year. By early April, the snow had retreated to the north slopes, and the earth beneath the cabin's porch began to soften, smelling of pine and damp soil. The creek behind the barn ran higher each day, muddy with meltwater. Barret spent his mornings fencing the lower pasture while Faye started seedlings on the windowsill, her hands stained with black dirt, her expression more settled than he'd ever seen it. She didn't speak of the past anymore, and he didn't ask. Something between them had shifted since that morning at the barn. It lived in the quiet way she'd begun standing closer to him, in how she lingered near the stove after supper until their shoulders touched. One evening, after the horses were watered and the light had gone gold across the ridge, Faye brought out a small bundle wrapped in muslin. "I've been holding on to this," she said, laying it on the table. "Didn't think I'd see it again." She unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a set of embroidery needles, a thimble, and a half-finished strip of linen stitched with wildflowers. "My mother taught me," she said, running her thumb over a thread of indigo. "Didn't have much, but she said a plain life should still have beauty in it." Barret leaned forward. "You made this," she nodded. "Started it in Nebraska, thought it might be a border for a pillow, maybe a hem, just something to keep my hands busy." He watched her trace the edge. "You want something to stitch? I've got a sack of torn feed bags in the shed." That made her laugh, a soft breath that curled in her throat. "Not quite what I had in mind." He smiled into his cup. "Still, if you're wanting to make things here, you can." She glanced at him then, eyes soft. "You mean that?" "I do." Later, she tucked the bundle into the top drawer of the dry sink, beside the coffee beans and the tin of salt. There was no ceremony to it, but it felt like something set down for good. As the days lengthened, Barret built a new chicken coop. Faye kept to the garden patch, knees in the dirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She hummed, sometimes tuneless, gentle things that had no beginning or end. One afternoon, while Barret sharpened the blade on the drawknife, Faye came to the porch carrying a folded paper. "Mr. Flynn," she began, then hesitated. "Can you read?" Barret pulled the blade across the stone one last time before setting it down. "Well enough." She handed him the paper. "Found this in my old coat, thought it was just a scrap at first." He unfolded it. The ink was faded, the lines neat. It was a newspaper clipping torn at the edge. "Rourke farmstead burns," he read aloud. "3 dead in night blaze." Faye sat on the step, hands clasped in her lap. "My brother's land," she said. "Outside of Lexington. They took us in after things went wrong. Fire started in the hayloft." "No one ever said how." Barret lowered the paper. "I was the only one outside that night," she added. "I'd gone to check the goats. I heard my sister screaming through the smoke." He sat beside her, boots on the lower step, the paper crumpling quietly between his fingers. "After that, I stopped believing there was anything left for me." Barret didn't speak. He reached across and rested his hand over hers. She didn't pull away. That night, while she stood at the basin rinsing her face, Faye said, "I thought I'd never feel safe again." "Not really." "Not in my own skin." Barret had just banked the fire. He turned, watching her catch the water in her cupped palm. "I'm not asking for anything," she said, voice low. "But if I stay, I want to earn my place." You already have, he said. Faye dried her hands on the towel, then crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, eyes searching his. I want to build something, Barret, not just survive. His throat tightened. You think I've been living just to get by. I think you've been waiting for something more. He didn't answer. He just reached out and touched her cheek, his fingers brushing the curve of her jaw. Faye leaned into the touch. You reckon we could make something here? She asked. He nodded, slow and sure. I reckon we already are. She rose onto her toes, and he met her halfway. Their first kiss was quiet. No rush, just the soft press of mouths learning the shape of a promise. When it broke, she rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her like he meant to keep her there. Not for a while, not until she moved on again, but for good. The wind rattled the shutters once, then eased. Inside, the cabin was warm, and everything held. By the time the first shoots of green broke through the thawed earth, Faye had sewn new curtains for the cabin windows, pale muslin with a blue stitch along the hem. They caught the morning light in a way that softened the rough-hewn walls and made the single room feel less like a place someone had survived in and more like one they might choose to stay. Barret noticed how she'd begun keeping her hair braided again, tied low and secure. He didn't say anything about it, but he watched her fingers work the strands in the quiet after supper, steady and sure, like someone reclaiming a rhythm she thought she'd lost. One afternoon, while he was oiling the harness straps in the tack shed, she came to the doorway holding a folded scrap of paper. There's a woman in town, she said, goes by Mrs. Loring. They say she teaches girls letters and numbers if they're willing to help with her laundry. Barret looked up from the strap. You thinking of going? Faye nodded. I never learned much beyond my name and a psalm or two. I thought maybe it was time. He set the harness down on the workbench. You'd ride in alone. She said I could stay in the back room if I swept and kept the stove going. Barret wiped his hands on a cloth. You'd be gone how long? 4 days a week, back by Saturday afternoon. He stepped outside, the sun brushing his shoulders. If this is something you want, I'll hitch the team myself. I want to know more than what I've known, she said. I want to understand things when I read them. I don't want to look at a sign and feel small. He touched the post beside him, thumb running over the grain. You've never been small, Faye. She looked at him then, and something passed between them that didn't need words. I'll leave Monday, she said. He nodded. She turned back toward the house, and he watched the sway of her skirt as she walked, the way the sun caught the edge of her braid. There was pride in her step now, and he felt it in his chest like a new breath. That Monday, he rode into Rawlins with her. The road was dry enough for wheels again, and the wagon rattled over ruts from melt and mud. Faye kept her hands folded in her lap, her face calm but her fingers restless. Barret didn't speak until they reached Mrs. Loring's. It was a narrow house with faded clapboards and a crooked fence, but the windows gleamed and the chimney smoked gently. You sure she's decent? He asked. Faye studied the house. She's kind and she doesn't pity me. That settled it. He helped her down from the wagon and handed her the small satchel she'd packed. She kept it light, only what she needed. Barret watched her walk to the door, knock once, then disappear inside. The ride back was quieter, though the wind had softened. At the cabin, he fixed the south fence and spent the evening sharpening the scythe. The house felt still without her, and the silence sat differently now. Not empty exactly, just expectant. By the time Saturday came, he was already waiting by the road. Faye rode back on the supply wagon Mrs. Loring hired when the weather was fair. She stepped down with a book tucked under her arm and dirt on her hem, and when she saw Barret, her mouth lifted into something he hadn't seen before: satisfaction. That looks like a fine week, he said. I can write out my full name without stopping now, she said, and I read a whole page without help. He took her satchel and set it in the wagon bed. That's so, she nodded, and I found a recipe for soap in an almanac. Thought we might try it. At supper, she read from the book aloud while he cleaned the rifle. Her voice stumbled sometimes, but she kept going, her brow furrowed in concentration until the paragraph was through. He waited until she looked up. You read it clean, he said. Every word. Her lips parted, and for a moment she didn't speak. Then she said, I never thought I'd hear that said to me. You earned it. Later, as they washed the dishes side by side, she asked, "What about you? You ever wish for something different?" Barret rinsed a plate, set it on the towel. "I used to think I'd never want more than quiet and land to work, but lately I've been thinking different." She dried her hands. "What changed?" He met her eyes. "You." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her. "I want to stay," she said quietly, "not just in the house, not just through spring." Barrett's voice was low when he said, "Then stay." Faye reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "You don't have to be." He leaned down, his forehead brushing hers. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, soft as breath. Inside, she pulled him into the stillness, and he followed willingly. The late May sun hung low behind the ridge, casting a coppery hush across the pasture. Barret leaned against the corner post of the new shed, watching the wind tease the tops of the young wheat. Behind him, the rhythmic scrape of a hoe worked through soil, steady and even. Faye stood barefoot in the garden, sleeves pushed to her elbows, a straw hat shadowing her face. She tipped her chin toward the sky now and then, gauging the light, her hands sure as they moved along the rows. Barret let the moment stay quiet until she looked up. "You're planting late," he said. She straightened, brushing dust from her knees. "I'm trying foxglove along the fence. Mrs. Loring gave me a handful of seeds and said it keeps the gophers off the carrots." He crossed the yard toward her. "You believe that?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I like the idea of something pretty doing something useful." He nodded. "You've made this place different." She leaned the hoe against the fence and stepped closer. "You have any family left?" Barret hesitated, then shook his head. "My older brother died in the war." "Folks passed before that." "I figured you might have had people," she said. "The way you carry yourself." Barret kicked at a clod of dirt. "I tried homesteading with a cousin once down toward Green River. He drank the winter out and left nothing but debts behind. I stayed. Paid it off hauling freight. You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" "I did once," he said. "But I rode east one spring and didn't get past Cheyenne. Felt like I was riding away from something I hadn't finished." Faye traced a line in the soil with her toe. "I used to think staying still meant giving up." Barret watched her. "And now I think maybe it means choosing." The breeze shifted, carrying the scent of pine sap and warm earth. He reached out and brushed dried soil from her wrist, his thumb lingering just long enough for her breath to catch. That night, she pulled a folded envelope from the drawer and laid it on the table. "I wrote to the land office," she said. "Asked about filing papers. I didn't sign it yet." Barret took a seat across from her. "You thinking of filing under your name?" "I am," she said. "I want something that's mine by law as much as it is by work." He tapped the envelope with a knuckle. "What'll you grow if you do?" "Barley, maybe. Lavender if I can get it to hold through the frost. A few hens, not much, but enough." She paused. "I'd still want to share your table." Barret looked at her for a long beat. "You wouldn't be sharing, you'd be keeping it." She reached across and took his hand. "I want to stand beside you, not under you," she said. He closed his fingers around hers. "That's the only way I'd have it." They sat like that a while, the oil lamp burning low, the window open to the night sounds. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, answered by the hush of wind moving through cottonwood. When he rose, she followed. He took her hand without a word, and they walked out into the yard beneath the stars. The garden, the pasture, the cabin behind them, all of it quiet, alive, and theirs. Faye tilted her face to the sky. "Barret, yeah, I don't want to file for land unless you're on it with me. I've done enough things alone." He stepped behind her, resting his hands on her shoulders. "Then we'll file together." She turned and leaned into him, her voice barely above the wind. "You sure?" He kissed her forehead, then her mouth. "I've never been more." And there, under the wide Wyoming sky, with spring unfolding around them and nothing between them but truth, they stood like a promise made whole. June settled in quietly, warm and slow. The days stretched long, and the light came early through the cabin windows, softening Faye's features where she slept curled beneath the quilt. Barret rose each morning before the sun crested the ridge, stepping softly so the floor wouldn't creak beneath his boots, watching her for a moment before slipping outside to start the day. She stayed through the week now, only riding into Rawlins the first Saturday of each month to help Mrs. Loring with her ledgers. That morning she returned with a parcel wrapped in butcher paper and a second pair of gloves, the kind stitched fine with a hem of lace at the wrist. "I traded for them," she said, laying them on the table. "Thought I might wear them when we file." Barret turned them over in his hands. "They suit you." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "We don't have to stand up in a church," she said, "but I'd like to mark it, make it known." He reached for her hand. "Then we'll do that." They chose a clear Sunday after the first hay was cut. Barret shaved, and Faye wore a dress she hadn't touched since Nebraska, the fabric pressed and clean. They rode into town with the land papers tucked between them, stopping first at the clerk's office, then at the small chapel near the livery. The man who married them was quiet and quick, a reverend who'd come west from Illinois and asked no questions. Faye signed her name with the same firm hand she used when planting seed, and Barrett's signature followed, angled and solid. They exchanged rings made from plain silver, nothing carved, nothing costly, but chosen together at the dry goods store 2 days before. Afterward, they stood outside in the shade of a cottonwood, watching the dust blow down the main road. "I'm not used to things being simple," she said. Barret looked down at her hand in his. "Maybe it's not simple, maybe it's just right." They rode home with the sun behind them. The wind smelled of cut grass and the distant tang of sage. She leaned against him on the seat, and he kept one hand on the reins, the other resting warm against her thigh. At the cabin, she stepped inside first, then turned and held the door open. "Come in," she said. "This is yours, too." They spent that night in the quiet of their home, no fire lit, just the warmth of June air and the hush of crickets beyond the open window. Faye lay beside him, one hand on his chest, her breath slow and even. He kissed the ridge of her brow, then her shoulder, and she shifted closer, her leg hooking over his. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The next morning, Barret hitched the wagon and Faye packed a basket. They rode to the northern edge of the property, where the land sloped down toward the creek. He laid out a blanket, and they ate under the cottonwoods bread, smoked ham, and a jar of blackcurrant preserves she'd traded for in town. "I want to build a root cellar," she said, wiping her fingers on a cloth. "Somewhere cool enough to keep potatoes through the winter." He nodded. "We'll start next week. I've got stone near the ridge we can haul down." She stretched her legs across the blanket. "And I was thinking we could plant a row of gooseberries behind the shed. They'd get enough shade there." Barret leaned back on his elbows. "Planning for a long stay?" Faye looked at him, eyes steady. "I'm not leaving." That night he brought out a small tin box from the shelf above the hearth. Inside was a folded letter, a photograph, and a gold coin worn smooth from years of handling. "My brother gave me this before he left for Virginia," he said, placing the coin in her palm. "Told me to keep it until I had something worth starting." She closed her fingers around it. "You sure you want to let it go?" "It's not gone," he said. "It's finally where it belongs." They buried it beneath the first fence post of the new paddock, pressed deep into the soil, a quiet pledge between them. Faye held the post steady while he tamped the earth around it, then stood back and brushed her hands clean. By late summer, the cabin had changed. She'd sewn cushions for the kitchen chairs, and he'd built a shelf for her books. The garden stretched wide, thick with green. They rose early, worked side by side, and ended each day with their feet in the creek or their hands tangled beneath the covers, the air warm and full of breathless quiet. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky turned the color of old bone, Faye stood on the porch, arms folded across her chest. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. "Not just the land, the peace." Barret stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "It's ours." She turned in his arms. "I want to grow old here." "You will," he said. "With me." She laid her head against his chest, and they stood like that while the last light faded. Years later, the land office would still have their names on record, side by side on the deed. The root cellar would hold through every winter. The gooseberries would grow thick behind the shed, and the foxglove would bloom along the fence each spring. And in the evenings, when the fields were quiet and the wind moved gentle through the trees, Barret and Faye would sit together on the porch, fingers laced, hearts steady, the sky wide and open above them, their home, their land, their love fully earned and never let go.